This chapter provides substantial opportunities to extend concepts taught in preceding chapters while introducing some really interesting new ones. The chapter emphasizes the linkage between EI, emotional intelligence, and your career success. One means of increasing emotional intelligence is to help your organization, as well as help you develop a confirming communication climate, culture, and develop your confirming communication style. As we've said many times up to this point, it's really hard to overstate how important communication skills are in your career. In one survey, 1,000 personnel directors in the U.S. were asked to describe the ideal management profile. The top characteristic was the ability to work well with others one-on-one. Even CEOs who manage technical workers need people skills to succeed. And I'm sure you've all seen this before. Poor interpersonal skills are often blamed for derailed projects. So let's focus on building positive relationships and what does communication climate mean? Many communicators unnecessarily attack the other person when delivering a message. They may say things like, "Your report is too sloppy," or "You'll have to clean it up," "You're always late," or "That was a dumb promise you made. We can never have the job done by the end of the month." Statements like these are often called you language because they point a verbal finger of accusation at the receiver. Things like "You're lazy," "You're wrong." Now, by contrast, descriptive statements are often termed I language since they focus on the speaker instead of judging the other person. So let's spend a little bit more time talking about how to build a positive communication climate. And you do that by focusing on solving problems, not controlling others. Even if you're in charge, others can get defensive if you force them to accept an idea that they don't agree with, or maybe one they don't understand. For instance, maybe you're up against a tight deadline. It's really easy to say, "Listen, to hurry this project along, just do it my way." I've been guilty of that myself. Because control shows a lack of regard, this type of control does show a lack of regard for the other person's needs, their interests, or their opinions. It's going to cause problems in the relationship. Even if it gets you what you want for now, long term, it's going to be more destructive. But in contrast, problem-oriented messages aim at solving both persons' needs. In this situation, a problem-oriented message, the goal rather is to solve a problem to solve a problem my way or your way, but rather to develop a solution that meets everyone's needs. We'll learn and cover more about how to achieve problem-oriented solutions when we get into the win-win negotiation strategy later in this discussion. So one way or one approach we have to build a positive communication climate and build positive relationships is to be honest and don't manipulate. Once people discover that they have been manipulated, a defensive reaction is almost always guaranteed. The textbook explains that if one statement of mine in 100 is false, you may choose not to rely on me at all. Unless you can develop a theory of when I am honest and when I am not, your discovery of a small dishonesty will cast doubt over everything I say and do. And this is really good management advice in terms of being honest with your team and also being honest with everyone around you and everyone who supports you and you report to. Another strategy for building positive relationships by enhancing a positive collaborative communication climate is to show concern for others, not rocket science here. Indifference or a lack of acknowledgement of concern for others is likely to trigger a defensive reaction. By contrast, a genuine message of interest can do wonders. The customer support agent who takes the time to find the right person to answer your question can leave you feeling grateful and worthwhile. You've experienced this when you've had gotten help from somebody, they've gone above and beyond. And this encourages you to do business with that company again. And the same situation applies to our careers. The manager who seems genuinely concerned with your opinions, even if he or she doesn't agree with them or maybe doesn't really validate or back your approach too much, they're a lot easier to work with than one who brushes your concerns aside. Extending this conversation on how to build positive relationships in a supportive communication climate is to praise progress, not just when things are perfect. You might wonder whether some people do much of anything that deserves sincere praise. I get that. If you look for outstanding performance, the answer, maybe no. But you can still deliver genuine compliments by looking for progress. Another way to do this is to praise intermittently. Too much praise, it can sound insincere. And social scientists have discovered that it isn't even as effective as occasional compliments. Praise others from time to time when your remarks will have the best effect, but don't go overboard. Next, relay praise. If you already believe complimenting someone sincerely can improve the communication climate in your relationship, just wait until you see the benefits of singing their praises to others who deserve to know. This is easily accomplished when you possibly forward an email message or let somebody else's bosses know that someone is doing an outstanding job. You will win the gratitude of that person you are complimenting. You will show your own sense of security and team spirit when you praise others and forward that praise. And you will be informing others about information they will probably find valuable. Praising others takes very little time, and it benefits everyone and has long-lasting benefits. You can also become a praise messenger by letting other people know you've heard other people saying complimentary things about them. They will be more likely to continue that behavior. And that's the key here, is when people are praised intermittently, they continue and enhance and extend that behavior, and they will feel better both about the person who praised them, the project they're working on, and about you for delivering the good news. Finally, this praise needs to be sincere. Insincere praise is worse than no praise at all, actually. It casts doubt on all your other compliments. It suggests that you can't think of anything the other person has done that deserves genuine acknowledgement, and it suggests that you're lazy, really, and you think the recipient is naive enough to believe in your phony compliments. On the other side of building positive relationships and giving praise, sometimes you have to deal with criticism. And how do you offer criticism, and how do you deal with criticism and at the same time provide constructive feedback? In the real world of work, criticism is a fact of life. Sometimes you have to deliver a complaint, and other times you are on the receiving end of other people's misgivings. Either way, criticism can start a cycle of defensiveness that pollutes the communication climate between people or teams. Despite the risks, critical messages don't have to create problems. With enough skill, you can learn to both deliver as well as respond to them, and that's what we'll look at here. How to deliver and respond to them in ways that can maintain and sometimes even improve the relationship. So offering constructive feedback. Despite its fight-finding nature, criticism doesn't always have to trigger a defensive reaction. The way you present criticism can make the difference between your comments being accepted and considered or just being disputed and ultimately rejected. You can maximize the chances by strategically choosing the best sender of the message, by carefully framing your message, and by paying attention to your delivery. So those are 3 things that you can do when you are sending criticism. Make sure that you or somebody is the best sender of that message, properly frame it, and deliver it appropriately. So let's look at that first one about who delivers the criticism. Now, who delivers the criticism can make a big difference in how the feedback is received. So 2 guidelines I'm going to give you will help you choose the sender. First, choose the most credible critic. Sometimes the recipient will be more receptive to one person than another. If a choice is available, make sure the message comes from whomever can deliver it most effectively. Think about whether you would want to receive feedback from your boss or from your boss's colleagues. Somebody else's VP or somebody else's director or manager really doesn't have the insight into your projects or your progress, but your manager does. So he or she probably should be the right person to provide that feedback. The other guideline I'll tell you is make sure the criticism is appropriate to the critic's role. Even accurate criticism is likely to be rejected if you have no business delivering it, much like the example I gave you a second ago, is making sure the right person delivers the message. Another example from the text is most comments about someone's personal life are out of place unless they affect a working relationship. Job-related comments should be appropriate for relationship to the other person. So again, this speaks to who is providing the feedback, who's providing the criticism, making sure that the people who are in the know and understand the situation and have all the information, these are the right people who can provide and should provide that type of constructive feedback. Now, the other one is how you deliver the criticism can make a big difference in the way it was received. We talked about who the sender is and what the relational climate is like, but the way it's sent is also very important. The most effective feedback is delivered, respectively, and I'm going to give you a few guidelines to help you deliver respective feedback. First, deliver it privately. This should be obvious to most people, but deliver it in a private setting. Criticizing in front of others is likely to trigger embarrassment or resentment. Nobody likes to be called out in front of their team. Allow enough time is another guideline I'll provide you. Waiting until the problem turns into a crisis can be a recipe for disaster. Don't wait too long. It's far better to discuss the problem in depth when there's plenty of time to fix things before things boil over, before things have gone too far to be remedied. Next, avoid sounding and looking judgmental. Avoid using the kind of language described in Chapter 4, calling names or using inflammatory labels, and don't attribute motives to the other person. Try to use the descriptive I language described earlier instead of defensive, arousing you statements. And this is really going to help you avoid sounding condescending, and make sure that, and also make sure that your nonverbal behavior, such as shaking your finger, raising your voice, or rolling your eyes, are also avoided. So those are some of the guidelines in terms of how to deliver criticism. Consider that it needs to be sent from the right person, it needs to be respectful of the climate, and it needs to be delivered effectively. But what about how you deal or respond to criticism when you're on the receiving end? So responding to criticism, when people are faced with criticism, the two most common responses are fight or flight. Fighters react by counterattacking or blaming others or finding excuses. I'm not the only one who's at fault here, or here's really what happened, or this was the situation and I had no control over it. Very dismissive. Your own experience probably shows that fighting with your critics really doesn't amount to a whole lot and really seldom persuades them to change their mind. Most business people are too mature to run away from conflict or a critic, but there are ways, rather, of avoiding or evading negative remarks. Sometimes you can physically avoid the critics, steering clear of their office or not returning calls, for example. I've done that. I know that I've screwed up a project. I'm going to literally walk around somebody's office so they don't have to see me, and try to avoid them as much as I can. It's a short-term solution. It's because even when you can't escape unpleasant remarks, you can mentally disengage by refusing to listen. While keeping quiet can seem to work in the short run, it's not very satisfying and not a very effective way of dealing with an ongoing relationship in which you're constantly under attack. So I'm going to give you something that's an approach or a strategy that might be difficult to kind of stomach. It's a tough one. So responding to criticism, one strategy, instead of maybe fighting it or flighting from it, running from it, is to agree with the criticism. This is an obvious one, but it's often overlooked because it's really difficult for some of us to do. It's a difficult way of responding, and that is to agree with the criticism. Although this approach might seem like a form of self-punishment, it can be very effective. Sometimes you are confronted with facts that really can't be disputed. In these cases, your best approach is probably to face up to the truth. You're right. You're right. I have been late 3 times this week, or that project was not really my best work. Notice that agreeing with the facts doesn't mean you are accepting responsibility for every imaginable fault. It's not a mea culpa. You're not falling on your own sword. In the case of being late to work, you might go on to point that your lateness is a fluke in an otherwise spotless work record. But arguing with indisputable information isn't likely to satisfy your critic, and it will probably make you look bad. What I've found in my career and when I've managed people and when I've been faced with feedback is an approach of much like this, where you say that, that's fair feedback, or I understand that feedback. Thank you for sharing that feedback. I've used the phrase, that's fair, or I understand. It's different. I'm not saying that I agree with it, or I'm not saying, yeah, you're right, I do suck, or this project was a total failure, or I have no idea what I was doing. But you're acknowledging the sender's opinion. And remember, when you're dealing with feedback and criticism, opinion is reality and perspective is reality. And if your manager or your boss, or if you're giving that feedback to somebody, that's your opinion, that is your reality. And it's very effective strategy on this slide to deflate that by kind of agreeing with it, because what it does is it allows the sender to get that message off his or her chest, give you that feedback, and move on. Just say, got it, sounds good, I understand. That's fair feedback. That's helpful feedback, thank you. And they'll drop it. But if you argue with them and get defensive, that feedback will continue going on and on and on. But sometimes that feedback can escalate. The fight or flight response, maybe you decide to fight. Not always a good idea. And maybe you decide, instead of saying, I understand, thank you for sharing that feedback. Maybe instead of saying, got it, thank you for providing that feedback, or that sounds fair, maybe it escalates. And now it's turning into a conflict. So we've kind of progressed in our discussion from feedback and receiving feedback to what happens if the feedback is not handled well and it turns into a conflict. The most obvious source of conflict is the subject at hand. What are you talking about? Maybe it's a project. Maybe it's your attendance record. So these topic-related or topic-level disagreements are a fact of life in our workplace. Another one might be relational issues. As we read in Chapter 1, along with substantive content issues are relational disputes that center on how parties want to be treated by one another. Relational issues can involve conflict or the affinity, how much you like or dislike somebody, or how much you respect or don't respect somebody. Now, there are several ways you can manage a conflict, and this is a slide with these 5 bullet points that you'll probably see several times throughout many of your courses, because it's a very standard way of addressing or handling conflict. So you're going to run across these in a lot of your studies, whether they're sociology or management studies or business studies or psychology studies or communication studies. You're going to see these 5 conflict management styles in many, many places. Because when faced with a conflict, we do have choices. And that's the hard part to understand, is that our behavior is a choice in terms of how we respond and react to conflict. And we have several different approaches. First is, and again, before I get into these, some of them are better than others, but they're not mutually exclusive. You can use many different styles, and many people use many different styles, and you'll probably recognize a lot of these. One of them is avoiding. One way to deal with conflict is to avoid it whenever possible and withdraw when confronted. And a lot of these are culturally based too, like avoiding cultures. There are some high conflict avoidant cultures and high conflict avoidant businesses too. In some cases, avoidance is physical. Remember, I said that you can literally walk away from somebody or walk by their office because you know that you're about to have a conflict or you've been in a conflict, and so you avoid it. Another one is to accommodate. Whereas avoiders stay away from conflict, accommodators, or accommodating, give ground as a way of maintaining harmony. Hey, I just want to get along. I don't want to have an argument. I don't want to have a conflict. I'll just give in. Now, it can be effective in some circumstances, but again, long term, you'll just turn into a doormat, if you will. A competing approach is based on the assumption that the only way for one party to reach its goals is to overcome the other. This is the zero-sum game approach, and it's common in many negotiations, as we'll see later in the chapter. It's kind of a win-lose approach, and it can be effective because it can get you what you want, but it can also be very destructive. And that's the key when we look at these 5, is that they may be effective in many circumstances, but there's always a negative component to it if taken to the extreme. Collaborating, on the other hand, is where communicators are committed to working together. And this is probably, out of the 5, collaborating and compromising, the last 2 on this list, the collaborating and compromising, are probably the most positive of the 5 options, because collaboration is based on the assumption that it is possible to meet one's own needs as well as those of the other person. And then finally, compromising, because in a compromise, each party sacrifices something he or she seeks to gain an agreement. They're giving something up. On one hand, this approach is cooperative, recognizing that both parties must agree to resolve a conflict. On the other hand, compromise is self-centered because the parties act in the self-interest of their own, or in their own interest, to get the best possible deal. So now that we understand the 5 types of conflicts, how do we handle the conflict constructively? So when you avoid a conflict or accommodate another's demands, few communication skills are necessary. You just either walk away or give up, or give up rather. But if you decide to address an issue directly, either in a collaborative, competitive, or compromising fashion, you're going to seek to negotiate. Negotiation occurs when 2 or more parties, either individuals or groups, discuss specific proposals to find a mutually acceptable agreement. A common strategy in negotiation is the competitive win-lose. win-lose approach. It's based on the assumption that only one side can truly reach his or her goals, and that any victory by that party will be matched by the other's loss. Nobody seeks out a lose-lose approach, and most people try to seek a win-lose approach. But a lose-lose approach can arise when competitors try to gain an advantage at the other person's expense, or the win-lose approach often becomes lose-lose. There certainly are cases in which compromise is the best attainable outcome, usually when disputed resources are limited or scarce. When people collaborate in negotiations, they can often, but not always, achieve a win-win outcome in which everybody involved is satisfied. Not everybody gets what they want, but they're satisfied with the outcome. Win-win solutions are easiest when each party's needs are compatible, meaning they go well with each other. So when we start thinking about how to negotiate, we need to start thinking about how we prepare, or what are some of the best steps in preparing to negotiate. Successful negotiations begin before you say a word to the other person. You can take several steps to think out your position and your approach in how you deal with your negotiating partner or the topic at hand, and do so in a way that boosts the odds of getting your message across and getting a constructive response. Here are some steps you can take. First, clarify your interest and needs. Make sure that you clearly state what your goal is and why you need to attain that outcome. Next, consider the best time to raise the issue. And this is something that a lot of people don't think about. Is the timing can have a tremendous impact on the quality of your interaction, whether it's the time of day or the time of year. Think about when you want to seek a raise, and that's kind of a conflict because there are mutually exclusive goals here. Your management team wants to control their budget and limit their spending, and you want more money. So that's an incompatible goal. So when's the best time of year to do that? It's probably right around the time of your performance review, and it's probably right around the time that you've really or it's around the time when you've really completed a tremendous project. So your timing is key in this situation, but it's also key in every conflict. Raising a difficult issue when the other person is tired or just got back from a trip or distracted by a lot of other projects, it's likely to threaten or decrease the odds of getting what you want. Finally, consider the cultural differences. As you plan your approach, consider the cultural sensibilities of your negotiating partners. You might have noticed in previous relationships or workings with your teams or people you're negotiating with that they really are conflict avoidant. You need to take that into consideration because that is a cultural variable of how they handle conflict. So finally, how to conduct the conflict negotiation. The win-win approach is most successful when it follows the steps we're going to describe right here. So how do you start this? Identify the end goal. Identify the end goal that both parties are seeking. Let's get it all on the table, get all our cards out. What are we trying to get to? What is our ideal state for both parties? So I know what your interests and needs are, and you're aware of what my goals are as well. Next, brainstorm a list of possible solutions. Work together to identify what this ideal solution for both people would look like. And once both parties have identified the ends they're seeking, the next step is to develop a list of solutions that might satisfy each party's needs. Evaluate the alternative solutions is the next step. Once you have the list out there, evaluate them. After brainstorming as many ideas as possible, decide which ones are most promising or fruitful and can be most likely to give each party what they want, as well as maintain and protect the relationship. During this stage, it is still critical to work for an answer that meets all parties' important needs. I didn't say all parties' every need, but all parties' really important needs. Cooperation will come only if everyone feels satisfied with the solution. Again, the key here is that not everybody gets everything they want, but they're satisfied. It's okay with the solution. Next, implement and follow up on the solution. Put that solution in place, and once the best plan is chosen, make sure that everyone understands it. They give it a try. Even the most appealing plans may need revision when put into action. After a reasonable amount of time, plan to meet with the other parties to discuss how the solution is working out. If necessary, identify the projects that are still unmet and then repeat the problem-solving procedure. Overall, this is a great chapter because it gives you some tremendous life lessons in terms of strategies to follow when dealing with conflict as well as negotiating.